This movie seems to have one particular philosophical framework that seems to be wrapping the entire movie, and that is a terror management theory.
No, 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 don't die, don't die, don't die, no, no, no!
We are Jellyfish DAO, and this is Jellyfish Movie Night, where we discuss how a movie relates to longevity and science of aging. I'm Tim Maupin. I'm the director of The Last Generation to Die.
I'm Keith Comito, president of the charity Lifespan.io, which works on aging research, which is relevant to this movie.
I'm Madalina Bellariu. I'm an actress, and I'm also a producer of Genetics.
I'm Laurence Ion. I'm an investor and entrepreneur and a steward of Deal Flow at Vida DAO, which funds longevity research projects and then spins out startups to accelerate these therapeutics to market.
I'm the director of Ageless, which is about the massive impact we will see when biological aging becomes treatable.
I'm Amy Schoaf. I have a company, Intrinsic Value Films and Television, and we make movies, and a few of those are in this space, including helping Galia make her film.
All right, so let's dive in. So this is a very interesting film in its structure. I'm very curious what everyone thinks of the plot structure. Did it make sense to you? Was it confusing? What do you think?
I think we really just have three narratives that are all proceeding linearly, but you're seeing pieces of them sometimes out of order. You have the real narrative, I think, which is Dr. Thomas and Izzy Creo, and that's like what's actually happening in reality. Then I'm just going to call Monk Thomas, he's got the shaved head and he's at the tree. And I think that represents Dr. Thomas's sort of interior world, like metaphorical, like what he's going through. And then you have Tomás, the conquistador, who's basically Ponce de Leon, looking for the fountain of youth, and Queen Isabella, as represented in Izzy Creo's story, The Fountain. And I think all three of those are proceeding linearly, but you're seeing the pieces of them kind of jumbled up.
So there's a quote that Aronofky said about the movie. The film is very much like a Rubik's Cube where you can solve it in several different ways, but ultimately there's only one solution at the end. So for me, I would take that to mean you can kind of put the plot together in different ways, like in terms of temporal structure, chronology, but the meaning ultimately kind of comes through the same way at the end. I think the only one that's a bit of a mystery that could go several different ways seems like the future Tom in the stars or whatever.
I saw the tree and that experience more of his internal consciousness, like maybe his soul interpreting what death is for him in the moment.
Aronofsky did inject that idea of, hey, he regrets he didn't spend more time with her, and that he regrets he tried so hard. And I don't like that. And I just choose to ignore that part. I choose to focus on other things, on how dedicated he was and how misunderstood and how hard it is to do it. Because obviously he wished to spend time with her, but I think it's a more of an expected value kind of calculation as well, where it's hard emotionally, but rationally it makes sense to try. Imagine like to the absurd, reduction to absurdio. You have a train moving towards you and you're tied to the tracks. You can choose, well, let me enjoy my last moments, or you can like draw off your hands and get off, and you might fail and you might have a miserable experience because the train might actually come and you might not actually escape. But I think it's worth trying.
I had similar feelings. I feel that the whole arc of the core of the film, the arc is going through this journey with Thomas, which is kind of parallel to our struggle as humans. We as children, we all of a sudden discover that life ends and there is aging and there is diseases and death. And it's hard for us to wrap our minds around it. We aspire to accept it as a fact of life. It's like this is tied to being mature and wise, is then when we accept death. And I think that's a journey that Thomas is going through. And then we have Izzy as a contrast. And we say about her that she has grace because she doesn't go out kicking and screaming like the rest of us, but she kind of accepted with grace.
This movie seems to have one particular philosophical framework that seems to be wrapping the entire movie, and that is terror management theory. Terror management theory has its root in the work of this cultural anthropologist named Ernest Becker, who in 1974 wrote this book called The Denial of Death. It basically presents this idea that, subconsciously, you're always aware that you are mortal, that you're going to die, and that this is terrifying. And you can't really look at that directly. So everything you do in your entire life is a way to manage that terror. And this is why you want to have children. This is why you want to live on. You want to do great work, so your name is put on a school somewhere. You're managing that terror. And you really have only one of two ways to go with that, according to those theories that became terror management theory. You either accept death and your impermanence, or maybe seek solace in the fact that you're going to die, but then there's going to be children and, flowers that will bloom from your grave, etc., which is represented by Izzy in this movie. Or you try to actively fight your mortality, which in those older works, which I'm not necessarily happy with, you become evil and you want to inflict death on others, so you have control over it. You want to assert your power. And in the parlance of that theory, the wrong thing to do is to try to fight death. And that is what Hugh Jackman's character, that's what Dr. Thomas is doing. Now, obviously, I have a lot of things to say, but I think this is actually a very fantastic movie, because the movie kind of ends up on the kind of death acceptance route, but still kind of presents a lot of the drive that makes you feel like, no, there's validity to the other route as well.
I would say one of the most impressive things I think about the film is that there literally is dialogue that says death is a disease and I will find the cure. Dialogue that says stop aging, stop dying. I don't know if I've seen a movie that puts that in a real modern context. So it's like, at least these things are on the mind. It's almost like if we could cut forward to 100 years in the future and these things are done, that side of the movie may have not a completely irrelevant notion, but something that's less relevant, because maybe we've actually solved aging at that point.
There is a very good tension there, and there's a lot of interesting things that are almost relevant to our field, like when he potentially finds a cure for aging, although it's not that simple. He almost doesn't care about it because he's just focused on cancer. One of the critiques of the field of aging research in the past was that it was too much of a focus on individual diseases instead of the holistic problem.
It's also so interesting that, I think it's said a few times in the film of like, I'm going to die and then we will live together forever. So it's almost like immortality can only be gained through death, which is kind of ironic. And that's also this dualistic view that we are split in this way, and that the body is not important. And there is even this like element of punishment when he drinks from the tree, and it's kind of greedily, and then he dies, but then like new life comes out of it. And it's like in a film that's been so ascetic up till now, all of a sudden he's punished for one moment of the indulgence of the body, of recognizing the body. And it seems like the idea is, yeah, you can keep living, but it will be like the individual doesn't count. It's like only if you participate in the creation of like this bigger organism that is immortal, but you as an individual can't be immortal.
I think that it makes sense as a coping mechanism psychologically. When you think that there's nothing you can do, now we're actually maybe at the point where we can get this stuff done. And some of us are working on advancing this field. We have dozens of pharmacological interventions that stop or reverse aging in model organisms, in animals. And we have some things being tested in humans as well. We don't, of course, know yet what is going to happen. There are various approaches in the industry that don't necessarily agree, but that's great, right? Personally, I've struggled with a lot of these philosophical questions. I enjoy life. I enjoy existence. That's why I want to extend life. And the way I've sort of solved this conundrum is, well, one, I think it's fine to take the risk. But two, I don't think it's smart to take the risk, because I would not be as efficient or effective in this quest, in my productivity, if I'm not enjoying life. I'm more productive, more creative if I'm also enjoying life, if I'm also taking a walk with my girlfriend when the first snow hits.
It feels like the film also has this internal conflict of, okay, the poster says like, what if you could live forever? So that's a teaser everybody likes. And there we have this like line that Tim, you quoted, like death is a disease like any other, which is very strong. You never hardly hear that in films. But then the film is full with other, like I've collected some quotes like death is the road to awe, death frees every soul, immortality equals vanity, no one invents new drugs overnight. Very similar to the arguments that we hear in the longevity field about why we shouldn't try to fight aging and death.
Even though it kind of sort of officially lands on one side, I thought the dialogue was presented well between the tension. And what was very present in the movie was how having a ticking clock on you really creates this unfair pressure where you have like this no-win situation, like Laurence was talking about it, like the train tracks, right? Because Hugh Jackman was very much in that situation. And maybe that's why I was a mark for this movie. Like I found this movie very effective just emotionally. Like if he had more time, then obviously it makes sense to work on the cancer drugs. But because the time is so short, he wants to spend the time that he has. But if he knew he had enough time, it's that tension, which was really, I thought, believable and well acted. I want to pivot off of that to something else really quick, building again off of what Laurence was saying, that my view on terror management theory, and this is kind of like implicitly built into a lot of the advocacy I do at Lifespan.io and elsewhere, is that there is a third way there. There's not just completely accepting death and there's nothing to do with it, or that you fight it and you become like an evil asshole, right? You know, there's a way to get that death acceptance and that compassion and that long view where you must have it, but still also recognize that it's a public good to try to fight age-related disease and try to merge those things together, to merge the long view that we currently maybe only can have through this death acceptance mindset with also actually trying to bring us there actually. So I think that's what I want to do.
It's pretty clear with longevity that when we get very close, everybody will be on board. And then we'll be sorry that we didn't accelerate it more when we could. I understand the argument that we need to find the balance, but there's always tension there.
What I also kind of took it as unfortunately, this is something that's present in a lot of the ancient myths as well, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, is that, you know, the fumble at the last second or like just missing, you know. And I think what this also might represent is that for the people that are pushing the boundaries, that are trying to do it, there's going to be intense soul-crushing sacrifice. And I think that's partially what that represents. Like he might have carried the torch to the next level, but it wasn't in time to actually help him personally. And to be a true hero in the parlance of Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces, there has to be that element of the depersonalization, like you might have to lose for humanity to win.
Avi, really quickly, I wanted to see I know the film doesn't really dive too heavily into the science, but as a scientist, did you find that cheesy or would you have rather they try to inject a bit more of any, you know, this was 2005, 2006?
That's not the science part. Like, I mean, come on. I mean, you get gold. Galia brought this up from this movie where like death is a disease. And I'm talking about like, you know, as a scientist in like 2008, 2009, 2010, you're getting this gold from a Hollywood movie. So like, I'll forgive it all its sins for like having quotable lines that you can send it as a gift. I personally didn't get locked in details. I mean, there were some gold moments that were really made me very happy.
There was something of interest that flagged my attention in that scene when he was talking about whatever they were combining in the protein binding domains or whatever. But there was a unnecessary offhanded comment in there that, you know, the look of it was like two lovers coupling. There's another kind of aspect that kind of interplays in with terror management theory, which is sort of the ancient idea of Thanatos, the god of death, and Eros, the god of love and also sexual love, sort of being like oppositional forces, or that, you know, the death drive and the sex drive, etc. Freud, Jung, etc., etc., etc. So I thought that was interesting. That kind of one of the things that might have unlocked, you know, immortality in this movie was this biochemistry thing that was expressed as a sexual coupling. So in terror management theory, one of the ways that you can mitigate your death anxiety is through the sense of, you know, the broader idea of procreation, of living on through children, which again is very much represented in this idea of the tree and dying and blossoming seeds, right? but also of sexuality.
Probably one of the highlights of the film to me was the visual motifs and parallels. All that stuff was done extremely well. Like a really cool like camera flip between going to the city and then he's going to look for the tree of life. The moment when he was about to try to solve immortality in the presence, he like lost his ring and he couldn't put it back on. And the ring is obviously a symbol of continuation, immortality.
You get way more by watching it a lot more. A lot of people, of course, like to go deep, but it's obviously a niche kind of thing where some people will really love your movie and a lot of people will not get it, versus the, simple movie with the, some cars exploding where everyone gets it, but nobody really changes their life because of that movie, right? So I think, artists really love sometimes to do this, even though financially it might not be sustainable, but it definitely grew over time, a community around it, people who really get it, and then kind of slowly grows. But of course, the business model in filmmaking doesn't really work there, at least in the old model where he had the cinema thing. Now with streaming, it could work, because even though it doesn't make a lot of money initially, years later, people watch it multiple times. You could also start a community from there and to explore other things, create other art.
I felt watching it that whether I like it or not, I so love to watch a director that you feel every choice is with full intention and vision, and he's so committed to it, and you see that he loves it and he cares about every detail. And that's part of the reason that his actors always have the best performances, because he loves them and he cares about them and he understands that all of this matters. And in that sense, I think it's really a successful film, because he really translated his vision, it seems, like fully and committed to it.
I do think this might have worked better in the streaming era because of that care, because this really matters. This movie is just like other Aronofsky movies like Pi, for example, is suffused with symbols. And I'm sure if you were looking in every corner, you'd find like these corroborating symbols. As one example, in the very beginning of the movie, the first quote was about the Garden of Eden, and then it's being guarded by the flaming sword, right? So then right in the first scene with the conquistador, you see the Orion behind him and you see the Shibaba kind of behind him there. And I noted it. And then I also noted that what they're calling Shibaba is Orion's nebula, which is in Orion's sword. So that literally is the flaming sword from the Garden of Eden. That's what I mean. That's just one example. Like, I'm sure the movie is like filled with all of that kind of stuff, so that like that's the kind of thing that can get like a following and a cultish thing.
Yeah, you should check out his other film, Mother. I mean, talk about trippy and symbolic. It's a little similar, like spiritual themes and like heavier, almost a darker place.
I read that the fountain contains the director's own spiritual beliefs. So his expressions in life is actually in the fountain. That's what he said.
Quick nerd comment on the VFX. Like, a lot of the backgrounds were shot with, I don't know if it was microscopic, but it was like really tiny, like the swirling ink and all that kind of stuff. So almost none of that was CG, or it was all very practical, which was pretty cool. And then the spaceship, he specifically commented, I guess they didn't realize it was actually supposed to be like a spaceship. And he was kind of surprised by that, because it's like his vision of like what a spaceship could be. It kind of breaks away from the classic like spaceship that looks like a car or with buttons or whatever, which I thought was really cool. Any specific negatives that anybody had that they thought maybe, other than the maybe confusing, or anything else that could have been better in your opinion?
This is the closest we get to a movie that really showcases the possibilities of a world in which people cure aging, death, disease. And I would have loved it to have gone in a different direction and less on the coping mechanism side and acceptance.
Maybe he wrote the movie this way because perhaps it's more of an effective narrative tactic, because here we all are, we're coming out with really feeling like, hey, we should work on aging and death, and that this movie kind of fuels that too, even though they land in the other direction, sort of. Where is that more effective than if Darren Aronofsky made a movie that was just like, come on, you idiots, aging is bad, let's fix it. This is a more subtle way to bring people to think about it on their own. And I believe, I know, Tim, for you specifically, because we talked about your script, but Are you all in your own movie projects thinking about this? Do you think that this is necessarily a flaw, or is it actually an effective tactic to present this kind of unanimous, like aging is bad kind of view of things?
First of all, we try to negotiate it. So we go through different stages. And I think that Buddhism and spirituality and finding that kind of solution doesn't negate later maybe adopting a different view when you realize that aging can actually be targeted medically.
I actually think Aronofsky was aware of the industry and wanted for this to happen, but then it wasn't as feasible back then. So he probably just landed on the acceptance and the coping mechanism. But maybe since then he got inspired by the new developments, the new results. And I think now with Limitless, he's obviously still intrigued by the idea. I mean, how can you not?
I think we should try to get him on and ask him that question. But it seems obvious that he's at least very interested in it. I mean, you wouldn't make a movie that says some of these things in the dialogue without having done at least a little bit of research. And then also clearly being an executive producer of Limitless, there's some interest there that's beyond, the normal person or whatever. To answer Keith's question, I've said this about my film for a long time, and I think we should make a distinction with Jellyfish that when we say positive towards longevity, it doesn't necessarily mean like things are all roses and, because obviously everybody can see right through that. That's not real life. You need drama, you need conflict to make things interesting. I think the Dragon Tyrant is a really great example of that as another sort of metaphorical way to do it. I hope that with my film, at the end of my film, one character survives with the technology and one doesn't because they barely miss. So like Galia mentioned earlier, this idea of a cusp between generations, I think is a really good way to frame it because it puts that clock right up front.
Do you not legitimately feel like it is fundamentally unjust when on the same day he gets the news that he solved it and his wife is dead? Doesn't that provoke the reaction like, I wish that went a different way?
I'm confused about, he's working on cancer, not on aging, but then all of a sudden the conversation is about aging and they're trying to solve aging with Donovan.
I think the Epic of Gilgamesh actually provides a touch point there because the moment of Izzy's death is very similar to the moment in the Epic of Gilgamesh when his best friend dies. And then even though the friend dies of something specific, just like Izzy dies of something specific, that's the moment where they're like, F this, let's just end the whole thing. If you liked The Fountain and you thought it was a good job representing kind of longevity and you want to see more movies being created, then join the Jellyfish community and help us. Or on the flip side, if you thought it could have been better and you want to see movies that address some of the issues that you wanted to see go further in The Fountain, same answer. Come and join the Jellyfish community.